Doctors, as a continuation of the previous video on parathyroid gland, calcium metabolism and vitamin D3, let us extend our discussion to calcium abnormalities and the hormone that we have not touched on the previous video, calcitonin. Calcium metabolism's importance lies in detecting as well as treating hyper as well as hypoglycemia. Now, as a medical college student, you guys need to have a very solid understanding of the pathophysiology behind clinical manifestations of hypo as well as hypercalcemia. The reasons, drugs that interfere with calcium metabolism, and how are we going to handle the patient. Anyway, at this level, as at first MBBS level, we don't expect you to have a very complete understanding of hypo as well as hypercalcemia. But you need to know what is the physiological background and pathophysiological significance behind the etiology as well as clinical manifestations. So friends, let us take up the very first topic, hypercalcemia now. So as we discussed in the previous video, the word hypercalcemia can be said only when plasma calcium level exceeds beyond 10.5 mg per deciliter. So the cutoff value for hypercalcemia is plasma calcium exceeding beyond 10.5 mg per deciliter. That's hypercalcemia, doctors. On what conditions we can have hypercalcemia? Now, the causes for hypercalcemia can be broadly categorized into two main subdivisions. The causes can be broadly categorized into two main subdivisions. The predominant cause is going to be hyperparathyroidism. You know very well, parathormone is essential in increasing blood calcium level. When parathormone levels are significantly elevated, there is going to be a tremendous reabsorption of calcium from nephrons, especially from distal convoluted tubule. And sustained increase in parathormone level, you know what will happen? It's going to act on osteoblast in a different manner. There is going to be cytokine production, there is going to be osteoclastic activation and bone resorption. Okay, so the most predominant cause of hypercalcemia is hyperparathyroidism. Now, every other cause can be put under a separate heading, which can be called as non-parathormone causes. In non-parathormone causes, we can have one very important manifestation, that is due to vitamin D toxicity. Too much of vitamin D consumption, okay, number one. Number two, we can also have hypercalcemia in vitamin A toxicity as well. Right, doctors? You need to understand the importance of vitamin A in hypercalcemia. Guys, both these vitamins, vitamin A as well as vitamin D, are fat soluble vitamins, isn't it? Now, when it comes to the action, if you look at the receptors for vitamin D, the vitamin D receptors are not just going to act independently. Vitamin D receptor is also going to get attached to retinoic acid receptor. Retinoic acid is nothing but an acidic form of vitamin A. So, when vitamin A levels are tremendously increased, even when there is normal vitamin D, there is going to be upregulation of vitamin D receptors. There is going to be increased calcium absorption from intestine, causing hypercalcemia. So friends, along with vitamin D toxicity, you also need to know about vitamin A toxicity, where hypercalcemia can happen. Now, as a first MBBS student, you can't afford to miss this one point. That is hypercalcemia seen with thiazide diuretics. Hypercalcemia seen with thiazide diuretics. Now, before we move on to the next topic, let us take thiazide diuretics in detail and see how this is going to cause hypercalcemia. Now friends, if you consider thiazide diuretics, it is going to act on distal convoluted tubule. It's going to act on distal convoluted tubule. Now for technical purpose, let me take up a distal convoluted tubule diagram here. See, I have a lumen. So on the luminal side, I do have epithelium of distal convoluted tubule. Let me take up two distal convoluted tubule epithelial cells, and I have a peritubular capillary beneath the distal convoluted tubular epithelial cells. So let me take up this as peritubular capillaries, and these two cells represents distal convoluted tubular epithelial cells. Now friends, let us get to the business here. On the basal side of the cells, when I say basal side, it means the cell membrane that faces peritubular capillary, not the nephronic lumen. Okay. On the basal side, we will be having a transporter called sodium potassium ATPase, which pumps 3 sodium out for exchange of 2 potassium. You know this. Sodium potassium ATPase pump is getting operated on basal surface. Now, on the next cell as well, we do have sodium potassium ATPase pump. When there is continuous movement of sodium out of the cell because of sodium potassium ATPase, what will happen to intracellular sodium level? You're right, doctors. There is going to be a fall in intracellular sodium level. Very good. Now, when intracellular sodium levels fall, there is going to be a gradient between tubular lumen and the epithelial cells of distal convoluted tubule, right? By utilizing this gradient, there is going to be a reabsorption of sodium along with chloride. There is going to be reabsorption of sodium along with chloride. This transporter is called as sodium chloride cotransporter. Sodium chloride cotransporter, right? So, when sodium and chloride are proportionately taken away from the tubular lumen, for example, in the tubular lumen, I have plenty of sodium as well as chloride. When all these sodium and chloride are taken inside the cell, okay, let us consider the cell has been taken up sodium and chloride. What will happen to sodium chloride concentration in the lumen? There is going to be a reduction in sodium chloride concentration. When the ionic concentration falls, okay, when the concentration of sodium and chloride in the luminal fluid falls, the luminal fluid becomes very dilute as well as hypoosmotic.